two-shot, action.
Richard, I'm sure I'm not the first person today who's told you this, but I will say it anyway. I'm sure you have a tremendous hit on your hands. I think it's going to make tons of money for Universal Pictures and hopefully for you too.
Well, I hope so.
Yes. You must have been quite young when the first Psycho came out, but what age were you?
I was 12.
Okay. What was your reaction then to the first time you saw Psycho?
I was scared out of my wits. I think my parents told me I shouldn't go to see it, and that seemed like a good reason to go and see it. So a friend and I went, and I was so frightened by it I went back 5 times. The same reason people go on roller coasters over and over again, to see whether they can conquer their fear.
What was it? Was it just the scariness of it or what?
There was something clandestine about the film, wasn't there? I think the whole notion of the Janet Leigh character just getting into deeper and deeper water was just the most horrible experience. And then, of course, that old dark house and the shower scene, of course. I mean, scared the wits out of me. Still does.
And I'm sure at that time you had absolutely no idea that you know, some 20 years or 30 years later, you would be directing.
No, I had an 8mm camera, and I used to make films when I was, well, I started when I was about 10, but it never occurred to me that a sequel would ever be made, not until about 2 years ago, and let alone that I would be directing it.
I think that, I know that you are a student of Hitchcock films, and I think that you're very true to the ambiance of the Hitchcock films, except for one thing, and your film is much more graphic in its violence than any other Hitchcock film. Why did you do that?
Well, his films would have been more graphic now. Psycho, if you go back to the original reviews, was considered very graphic at the time, and we didn't want to go to the extreme that some recent films have. I think we've been reasonably restrained, apart from a couple of moments, but we felt we had to make a film that was true to what the original was in 1960. It had to be relevant now, not just a piece of history.
Still and all, though, as late as 1976, Alfred Hitchcock said that he did not believe in graphic violence and that he would not have wanted to do the first Psycho in color because he would not have wanted to see red blood in the bathtub.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't really jibe with what you're saying.
Well, I know, but we did have people who worked on our picture who worked with him, and I talked to him on a number of occasions, and what he said publicly and what he believed privately were often different, and there are a couple of graphic moments in The Birds. That farmer who gets his eyes pecked out is pretty gruesome stuff. I don't think we've got anything heavier than that, to be honest.
You knew him as a student when you were a student at USC. What is your favorite recollection of Mr. Hitchcock?
Well, my first meeting with him, to be honest, I had to phone his office to get permission to screen one of the films. I think it was Rope, and he answered the phone, and I introduced myself, and he said, "Good morning, Mr. Franklin." I was 19 at the time, and it was one of the great moments of my life. I think when he came down to the cinema department in 1967 and they put me up on stage, it was my freshman semester, I was terrified, and at the end of the night he told me how nervous he'd been, and I thought that was an awfully nice thing of him to do. As it turns out, apparently he was very nervous. He had arranged to be interrupted if things were not going well, but things must have gone well because the interruption never came.
What is your favorite film of Hitchcock's?
Vertigo. Vertigo, North by Northwest, and Psycho, Rear Window. But Vertigo, I think, is his best film.
Again, referring to this time in 1976 when Mr. Hitchcock was asked his favorite film, he did not include Psycho. Does that surprise you?
No, and I don't think he included Vertigo. He used to say Shadow of a Doubt and Rear Window were his favorites, I think. I don't know, you know, people have differing perspectives on their own work. It's really for us to decide, isn't it, which are the great works?
As time goes on, do you believe that Mr. Hitchcock will always remain the king of the horror genre?
Well, the thriller, certainly, and the suspense thriller. It's unfortunate that in the 70s, and possibly as a consequence of Psycho, which was an unusual Hitchcock film. It was nothing like his others, but in the 70s, the word thriller became synonymous with horror films. But Raiders of the Lost Ark is a thriller, and so is Jaws. The horror film, I think he only made one film that approaches a horror film, and that was Psycho. And it's not really a horror film. It's a more complex hybrid of different genres than that. But he will always be the master, for me, not just of suspense, but of film technique.
Well, Richard, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk with you today. And again, I just know you're going to have a tremendous hit. And we'll look forward. One last question. Will there be a Psycho 3?
Well, that wasn't the intention. The ending kind of leaves it open, but my intention with the ending was to come all the way back to Psycho 1 and complete a cycle in a way, but who knows? It will be up to the powers that be in Hollywood to decide. It will have a lot to do with how successful Psycho 2 is.
Okay. Thank you again. Very
Thank
nice
you, Bob.
talking with you.
Good, Brent, save and save. All safe? Okay, well, action.
And sound. What was your reaction the first time you saw Psycho? This movie is very true to the Hitchcock genre, except that the violence is more graphic. Why did you do that? But that doesn't exactly jibe with what Mr. Hitchcock himself said in 1976. What is your favorite recollection of Hitchcock? What is your favorite Hitchcock film? Does it surprise you that Hitchcock himself did not include Psycho among his favorite films? Is there going to be a Psycho 3? That should do it. Thank you.